Warning, this video is not targeted to kids and may be inappropriate to younger audiences. Your discretion is advised.
Hello, dudes and dudettes. It's your favorite Reject Gamer Mix17 here, and yes, I was actually just planning to look around, but I wasn't expecting that. Yes, we are back once again in Minecraft. And for anyone a little lost with the title, basically, for one thing, of course, I am redoing my Minecraft lessons once again, even though I've been planning to do something, I just hadn't come up with an idea, but now I do, and that is, of course, to redo some of my previous Minecraft lessons due to the fact that, for one thing, they're outdated, and another thing, I did a poor job in them, so I want to educate furthermore on how to work my previous Minecraft lessons. And of course, due to the fact of the more recent update, somewhat, even though it came out like 2 months ago, being 1.17, I believe. Yes, the Caves and Cliffs update, we have a whole bunch of stuff that I need to get over with. Ignore the snow for now. So, without further ado, let us begin. Fair warning though, this only works on Bedrock as of this moment, and that's about it. At least everything I'm going to be going over with. So, what do we got inside our chest of goodies? We got ourselves the typical trees. Now then, of course, the trees are just the same as they always have been. You have how exactly you grow them and harvest them. I need space. I think I have space here. That, of course, being oak trees. Oak trees. Once you have a sapling, or just naturally generated, you can grow them. They'll even grow even taller than this, of course. Whether that be just a single log that goes upward. I think the max height that a typical tree will go up to is 7 or 8 blocks. And of course, the much bigger tree, which has a cluster of wood and a whole lot more leaves, which is a lot more pesky to deal with. Next up, we have spruce. Spruce wood, of course. Just takes a normal tree, that's a very tall tree, just takes a normal sapling and plants it down, or just naturally generated trees all around. This is a much different story. This was not planned. However, if you have 4 trees within a cluster area, like this, and grow them, this was not supposed to grow this big, it will end up growing into a very much gigantic tall tree, and will end up growing any soil that's surrounding it, specifically soil or what's the thing called, soil or grass. It'll grow into this podzol. Yes, podzol, that's what I believe I call it. I will clean this up later. Next up, of course, we have birch wood. Now, birch wood is just your typical birch wood tree. This one's actually a fairly tall one. Why am I getting tall ones? Similar to oak wood, but just different color leaves and wood. Next up, we got ourselves jungle wood, or jungle trees. One sapling will grow a very short version of it. Typically, these trees will grow much higher and not have this type of formation, but if you grow them in a similar state that was previously, they'll grow, this one's a tall one, into a much taller tree, arguably one of the tallest ones, and they'll have their little formation that typically happens on any type of jungle tree. I don't know why this shorter one got something similar to oak wood or birch. Next up, we have ourselves acacia, or I call it acacia, other people call it other things, and it grew very straight, even though technically these things will grow more angled. But regardless, that's how they work. And finally, dark oak wood. Unlike any of the other previous saplings, dark oak wood saplings do not grow by themselves. They actually grow within little patches like this. And then they'll grow into something similar to this. This is actually a taller one than I was expecting. Why don't I get these in my survival world? Anywho, So yeah, that's just basically all the trees. How to harvest them is fairly straightforward and simple. For one thing, you could punch them, but that could take forever. Next up, of course, though, is the tool that is the axe. Any type of axe will work, such as wood, stone, iron, gold, diamond, and netherite. And of course, shears work quite well to harvest any and all of the leaves. Yes, leaves. All the leaves in a very, secure way-ish, I guess how you would call that. Moving along. I swear this is going to bother me. What else do we got afterwards? We got ourselves our starting farm, I guess you can call it. If I'm not mistaken, these should be the only 6. Yes. The only 6 that you would have to deal with when it comes to farming. As I take forever trying to fix all this up. Obviously, you're going to need a hoe of any kind. And I forgot to pack a water bottle. Water bottle? Forgot to bring a water bucket. There we go. Now then, when it comes to water buckets, including water sources, I made myself very little room here. Water buckets, for any type of farm to make it the best way that it can be, can fertilize soil from a single source, at least, 4 blocks away, in any direction. So basically, you could have yourself a total of a 9 by 9 cube surface, square surface, I mean, where you can grow all of the wonderful crops that you need. That was not intentional. Next up, though, is the other thing, which is of course growing any and all of your crops that you need. Typically, crops grow better in, how would you call it? Vertical lines? Vertigo? Okay. Basically in straight rows similar to this, such as wheat, beetroot, potato, and carrots. It's as simple as that. And eventually these things will grow into, well, the crop that of your desire. Pumpkin and melon seeds start off like this. Every single thing will start off in a very, very small little thing, and eventually will grow into their own appropriate forms, if that makes sense. For instance, just to show it off a bit more, these were carrots, and they will grow into this form, and you can collect about roughly between, if I'm not mistaken, it is 2 to 5 on average 4 carrots each time. And then potatoes also have their own. They are growing really fast than I was expecting. Beetroots. Keep in mind that all of these 3 crops have the same amounts of average numbers. Hey, look, one of them grew. Average numbers of how much you'll collect, with the exception of potatoes, which have a chance of having poisonous potatoes, which are completely useless, sadly. If you have a rubbish bin, I suggest you use it. Wheat, however, from every single source of wheat area that you collect is only 1 wheat that you will collect, with the exception of seeds. Seeds for wheat, you will typically obtain roughly between 1 to 3 seeds every time. On average, somewhere between 2 and 3, which progressively gets very annoying when you have so much. And hey, there we go. Now we got the stages. The stems for pumpkins and melons, as you clearly saw, will grow that way, and eventually, of course, we'll end up getting pumpkins and melons. However, that's just something that won't happen for another while. Who knows? Maybe by the end of this episode, we'll end up getting ourselves pumpkins and melons. Somehow. Anywho. And as I mentioned with the seeds, of course, including anything that typically is grown on the farm, or on farm ground, you can easily just eliminate that whole process with just a composter and just toss it in there. Eventually, after this thing fills up, of course, you'll end up getting yourselves a nice thing of bone meal. Just one each time, though. So yeah, that's about it. Next up, we got ourselves sweet berries and glow berries. Now, these ones are a bit of an interesting one due to the fact of what exactly they need in order to grow, well, at least glow berries. Sweet berries can typically be found within, mostly found within taiga or spruce forests, but they also will occasionally be found in other areas, but most likely you'll be finding these things in spruce forests, and they'll just appear as that, or they have their own stages, which I hope we can see these stages. Nope. There's typically 2 other stages other than that tiny one, and they'll appear like this when fully done and grown, for which you can then just harvest them, and eventually it'll just keep growing back over and over and over again, naturally, without, of course, bone meal. I'm just using bone meal for the sake of time and showing. Next up, of course, is the glow berry. Now, glow berries don't grow above in the overworld. They actually grow in caves, specifically in the lush caves, which was introduced in the Caves and Cliffs update. They will appear something like this: weird vines or roots coming from the ceiling of multiple different surfaces, like stone. But eventually, glow berries will end up growing, and of course, you could eat it. However, of course, this feature hasn't been fully implemented yet. Not fully. Still working on it, I think. And the glow berries, as the name suggests, they will actually emit light. Not a whole lot of light, but still emit light. So yeah, in case you ever need to go down deep into the caves, just plant a few of these all around, and now you could have an somewhat infinite amount of food. Hooray! Now then, moving on to the next thing, we got ourselves coral. Now then, coral is actually a very interesting topic due to the fact of the multiple things that come with it, such as, of course, falling with it being kelp, seagrass, and sea pickles, if I'm not mistaken. That should be the only thing. Oh, and I guess I could throw in lily pads as well. The reason why I say these ones are thrown in together is because of what exactly you could do with all of this. Now then, within my little somewhat controlled environment here, which is an fully water-based area. If you take any area, specifically in bedrock, as I mentioned before, and fertilize the ground, whether that be grass, soil, sand, red sand, and so on forth, you can grow just about anything. That was weird, but yes. You could technically grow mostly seagrass and abundance of different types of coral. That, of course, being the 5 different types of coral. Other than that, though, you cannot grow coral blocks, but you can trade them or harvest them with a silk touch pickaxe. Most of the time. However, with coral block and sea pickles, you can grow sea pickles. As you can clearly see, we can't do that with anything else. And finally, or not finally, but almost to the end, we got ourselves kelp. Kelp, of course, will grow to a max height, I believe, of 21, I believe. And you can basically just harvest it, furnace, cook it, or smelt it, whatever you prefer, and you get yourself dried kelp, which can be used as a fuel source, specifically kelp blocks. I do not recommend food source, because they are the worst. And finally, lily pads. Sadly, lily pads, you cannot grow them, as much as people think that you can grow them, at all, regardless, but you can, of course, fish them from just average fishing, almost anywhere, trade them with wandering traders, or find them and harvest them from different types of biomes. Specifically, most of the time you'll find them in swamp biomes. Now then, moving on to the next thing, we got ourselves crimson roots. So yeah, I guess we can bring out all the crimson stuff and all the other nether things as well, which I believe that should be it, right? Yes. Nope, this one. Now then, all the crimson things all over the place. So, as of the Nether update that came out earlier this year, I believe. I think. Probably, I don't know. We, of course, were introduced to these two, which is the Crimson Nyleme, I think, and the Warped Nyleme. Very appropriate colorations, I guess you can say. By just having any source of them, and bone meal their the surface areas, you end up getting yourself, of course, the crimson roots, nether sprouts, warped fungus, and crimson fungus, and also the other type of roots, which is the warped roots. Other than that, though, with these areas as well, you can obtain another type of resource, which is, of course, the very interesting piece of wood that can be found within the Nether itself. That being using either the crimson fungus or the warped fungus, and when they grow, they become their appropriate versions of trees, which are also known to be fireproof, specifically the wood itself. Now then, these odd pieces of, well, I guess you can call them nether leaves, whatever these things are called, wart blocks. Yeah, because it's crimson and wart blocks. You can easily harvest these ones by just using a hoe. I'm not even kidding. That is the fastest way for you to obtain anything like these. Yes, I've tested it out. And of course, with these trees, you can get yourself a hold of shroom lights, which are very interesting and useful. On top of that, with specifically crimson crimson biome or crimson trees, you get yourself weeping vines, which will grow from the ceiling and not from the ground, and can go all the way down, which can be used to climb up, similar to vines. Now, when it comes to the warping roots, I don't know why I picked that up. They actually, or twisting root vines, they grow from the ground up, and if I'm not mistaken, they actually have a height limit. Yes, I believe so. If I'm not mistaken, it should be this one. And they act the same way as the weeping vines, just growing from the ground. And of course a different coloration. Now then, moving on to the next thing, we got ourselves the flowers. Oh boy. This is going to open up a whole different stuff. So, flowers. Flowers are very interesting, including all the other types of shrubbery that one can obtain. Now then, when it comes to these, I forgot about this. When it comes to these, any type of normal grass block or area, such as this controlled area, hopefully, if you bone meal it or just naturally generating, it'll spawn different types of things, such as, of course, grass, ferns, and large ferns. Wait, what? Okay, ferns, large fern, grass, double grass, and so on forth. But on top of that, though, you can collect yourself some flowers. Now, flowers, of course, some flowers you can obtain from certain biomes, but the majority of the time you can collect flowers from just about any source of grass block. However, when it comes to single small flowers, you cannot grow them or bone meal them. I say that, and yet that happens. Hold on. Let me grab the other ones that typically don't grow. There you go. I forgot. Typically those dandelions, if I'm not mistaken, they're called. And I believe roses are the exception. Other than that, though, the double tall grass plants, I guess you can call them, such as the lilac or lilac. I suck at pronouncing names, so I apologize. Such as the lilac, the sunflower, the rosebush, and the peony, can be just grown quite well by just using bone meal and using against it. And it'll grow anything and everything that you need. Now then, moving on. We shall move on to, I guess we could group all these together. Vines. Now, of course, not vines that came out back in a few years ago. Vines can, of course, as I mentioned before, could be climbed, such as the weeping vines and the twisted vines, which are typically found and grown on jungle biomes, and especially jungle trees. However, they could also be found being grown on normal trees, specifically oak and dark oak wood forests, or fallen trees as well. You can grow them. Okay, I must be thinking of a different version. Bedrock, you can't grow them. My apologies. However, on jungle trees, most of the time, whenever you grow a tree yourself, you cannot really receive cocoa beans. But if you do obtain a cocoa bean from a jungle and plant it down specifically on, jungle wood, I had to double check to make sure I'm not thinking of a different version, it'll start off like this and eventually have its second stage and its third and final stage, for which you can then harvest and collect more, which typically drops in a 3 to... No, I think it's a constant 3 seeds every time, and plant more, or just use it for cookies. Or killing birds. At least I don't think you can feed these to birds, actually. Moving on, though. Sugarcane. Sugarcane can be grown on any block source as long as there is water right next to it. For instance, we got grass right here. It could be grown on sand of any type, and soil, if I'm not mistaken, as well. Obviously not stone, and when it comes to podzol, you can grow it. Mycelium, you can't. So yeah, it's a little picky, but most of the time you're going to be growing it on something like this or sand, so not like it matters too much. And these things will grow typically 3 blocks tall. You just break it with your fist. It doesn't even require that much time. It's just one punch, and it'll eventually grow back once again once you plant one source of it. Same thing with bamboo. Bamboo will grow all the way up to 23 blocks, or 21. Now I'm starting to doubt myself. And first it'll start off like sapling, and then it'll grow into actual bamboo, and finally it will reach its height of ridiculousness. Yeah, that height. I think that's actually 13 blocks. Probably. And the fastest way to break bamboo is with a sword. Yeah, none of the other tools. Surprisingly, not even an axe. Yeah, a sword breaks bamboo a whole lot faster than anything else. So, yeah, that's a fun fact for you. Bamboo is typically used for scaffolding or as a fuel source or even as sticks. But I don't recommend the sticks part, unless you're in desperate need. Now then, moving on to the next thing, I guess we go into this one, which I was a little worried to go into, that being the Wither Rose. Now, Wither Rose is a bit of an interesting one. For one thing, you can make dye out of it. You can make black dye. Is it worth it? No, it's not. Wither Rose, you can plant it anywhere. It will cause harm to you regardless, and you can't grow it. You can't find it naturally in the overworld. So how do you find it? You find it by collecting it when the wither, the wither, not the wither skeleton, the wither boss, kills a mob. And that wither rose will be planted there or will just drop naturally. So yeah, it's not easy to collect wither roses, but it is, if you do collect it, it's something else. Next up, we got ourselves, do I still have that? Yes, I do. We got ourselves, some of the new stuff. Alright, let's grab them all. Now then, we're going to start off with moss blocks, because moss block is a very interesting thing. So when it comes to moss blocks, I thought I had space, or room even, but it doesn't look like it. Controlled environment, don't fail me now. So, moss block, it's a very, very weird thing to look at, but if you hit it with bone meal, it grows more, and it even grew through the stone. So yeah, it's going to end up growing more moss block. It's going to grow normal grass, a little bit of moss. I can't remember what they're called exactly, but there's something. And of course, some Azula trees, which I was actually going to bring up next. I think that's what you called them. Something like that, I guess. This thing's gonna... well, so much for, my thing. So yeah, there you go. Normal, I'm gonna call it Azula. I don't know why. And then the flowering one are basically the same thing. They'll have the different variations of leaves, that being, of course, the... I need some of this stuff still. Azula leaves and flowered Azula leaves. Flower ones are actually pretty nice, not gonna lie. Other than that though, the things I couldn't mention beforehand is the moss carpet. Of course it was. Next up, of course, we got the glow lichen. Now, glow lichen can naturally spawn anywhere and naturally be generated anywhere. And of course, as the name suggests, it will naturally glow in naturally just glow and emit light. And I said grow anywhere, I mean mostly in dark areas? No, mostly in cave areas and ravines. However, as of this moment, there's not really a way for bedrock players to harvest it. Now without completely breaking it. Next up, we got Spore Blossoms. Spore Blossoms, of course, as you can see, they can't really grow anywhere. They need certain... And I just tossed everything. Oh well, I still have the things I needed. Somewhat. Where was I? Right. Spore Blossoms. Just that I could show you, are a bit picky with their areas. You can't just place them anywhere. There's a few exceptions on some of the things. They will have this little effect, but for one thing, we can't find them naturally in the world of Minecraft, at least in Bedrock, and there's no really real way of harvesting them. Drip leaves. Small ones, of course, as you can see, cannot really be placed anywhere but on moss blocks. Now, these small ones will actually turn into a big drip leaf with just this, and you can grow them to be pretty tall. And drip leaves, if you stand on them, will slowly give out. And if I'm not mistaken, there you go, it will come back up. These are also redstone activated. So Oh, that was the moss. I forgot. They had their own sound. And then finally, dripstone. I know dripstone is, or at least the block itself, is not necessarily a block that you can just naturally grow in the sense of, you know, harvesting the wood or anything like that. But it does grow by itself, and over time it does, at least. Because of how dripstone works is that if dripstone block by itself has water above it, right above it, eventually it'll start to have the pointed dripstone. But again, like I said, it takes an extremely long amount of time. I swear if this thing grew in front of me right now, I would have been so disappointed in myself. Oh man. And of course, there was one thing I forgot to mention, specifically that deals with the Azula Trees. Now then, since of course I'm in creative, you all briefly saw the rooted dirt and hanging roots. Now, how these work is typically it'll happen with any block that the Azula tree grows on. It doesn't matter which one. As you saw, I planted them on grass blocks, and we got this thing called rooted dirt. I'll show you what happens in the process. Ta-da! And then the rooted, or the hanging roots is followed by the roots, or the rooted dirt as well. So yeah, that's a bit more trivia and other useful things in case you wanted hanging roots for whatever reason. However, so far unobtainable within Bedrock, sadly. Next up, we got ourselves, we'll go with the Amethyst. Now, Amethyst. Why am I talking about Amethyst? Well, I will tell you why. Obviously, we have the normal Amethyst block, which sounds amazing. And then, of course, we have our budding Amethyst, which also sounds amazing. However, budding Amethyst, as long as the block doesn't break, sadly, unobtainable without any way possible. I've tried this in survival with a silk touch pickaxe, and I couldn't harvest it whatsoever. But if you leave the budding amethyst alone, eventually over time it will start to grow amethyst shards, the small, medium, and large, eventually to the point where it will reach to amethyst cluster, which is when you can then harvest amethyst shards to make, well, tinted glass and other stuff. But as you can see, of course, it takes a long time, almost as long as our good friend dripstone. Now then, next up, we got ourselves Coarse Plant, or Coarse Plant. I've actually gone over Coarse Plant last time, and I think I had a very terrible description of it, but the Coarse Plant is typically found within the nether end, specifically the end city area, and it's filled with this plant. It will, once you plant it down, if you're able to harvest it, it'll look something like this. You can't really bone meal it. It grows naturally by itself, sadly. And then, of course, the coarse flower, which you can also not bone meal either. Eventually this plant will grow, I say that, but I think it actually needs this. Regardless, so eventually this plant will grow to extremely high height, and if I'm not mistaken, at the ends of each one, I believe the coarse flower, you can obtain the coarse fruit, and if you pop it into a furnace, you get yourself popped for coarse fruit. So yeah, stuff. I don't know if that's useful due to the fact that not many people just casually carry that stuff. Anywho, finally, next up we got ourselves mushrooms, if I can actually grab it. Thank you. Mushrooms are a bit interesting. Mushrooms technically grow anywhere. I'm not even kidding. They will grow anywhere they please. And they're also found within two of the worlds that we come across, such as the overworld and the nether. However, they mostly like to grow within dark areas, specifically caves even, and they will naturally just begin to grow by themselves without our assistance. So if you leave a mushroom inside dark areas, eventually they'll keep sporing? Sure. They'll keep spreading, basically, and that's about it. However, they are most prone to growing on mycelium, or mushroom islands, mushroom biomes, mushroom fields, whatever you want to call them. And if you just happen to be near one, you could grow them. And of course, these huge mushroom plants, or just basically big mushrooms, can grow naturally within the overworld itself, specifically in dark forests, such as the dark oakwood forest. Other than that, though, there's also the red mushroom. Wow, that thing's actually a lot taller than I was expecting. And you could harvest all these things as a decorative block. You can't really make anything out of these, but mushroom by themselves, you can make stuff out of it. Such from a variety of potions, farms of course, and food, obviously. And that is mostly it, with the exception of one final thing. Now, of course, this thing is empty in here, but one thing I do want to mention is the other thing that not many people look into, although they kind of look into it, but not too much, specifically grass and all the other variants that grow on the surface. Moss block doesn't really grow naturally by itself, but grass mycelium do. Grass grows a little faster than mycelium on normal soil. Eventually it will spread. People typically come across this issue when they want to have grass on elevated areas, or areas that are not typically surrounded by grass, and instead they just have soil sitting there. So eventually the grass has to grow. Or even underground bases, which, yes, I've done that. Podzoil does not grow naturally whatsoever, but it does grow and generate once you plant a really large spruce wood tree like I did earlier. And then obviously endstone does not grow, but both the crimson and warped netherite, or netherrack, technically they will grow by themselves, but it will take a very long time, and you could, of course, put the assistance in using bone meal on normal netherrack next to a source of any of these two variants, but it's not exactly the most cheap thing, unless, of course, you have a composter, or a skeleton farm, or anything like that. And now, finally, the last thing that I wanted to mention, that being snow. Why do I have a snow block here? Well, it's actually quite simple. Snow is interesting in its own way because of how it can work. For instance, you can collect snow from any snow biome that you come across with a shovel. You collect snowballs, put them into a 4 grid, and get yourself a snow block. And if you, from there, you could put 2 snow blocks next to each other and create a snow carpet or snow sheet. And if you stack those ones, well, it's a whole other story. But anywho, you could also collect snow if you have a snow golem, for which snow golems are known to leave a trail of snow. If you trap them in a certain area and you don't angle it at an area to where it doesn't hit them and have a shovel, you could constantly harvest snow for long periods of time or until your shovel breaks. Yes, I've used this method and I've nearly broken a diamond shovel. Actually, no, I've broken diamond shovels. And you could constantly keep doing that. You know, as long as the snow golem is alive, you can harvest snow. Other than that, though, you could also harvest snow from high elevated areas, and by that point, it would also naturally just grow by itself in a sense of just stacking, such as the snow sheet, to become a snow block, which all of it can be harvested from a shovel or a silk touch shovel. And finally, that deals with the snow is, I swear, I've been going all over the place, is the powdered snow, which can be collected from a cauldron, specifically a cauldron, nothing else, within high elevated areas where snow will start to naturally generate, or in snow biomes whenever it snows, much like how if it rains, the cauldron will have a chance of picking up said snow and basically filling up to this point, and from there you can pick yourself up some powdered snow. What does powdered snow do? Well, once you place it, it looks like a snow block, but you go through it. And eventually you get this awesome, cool frostbite effect, and eventually it'll start killing you. Hurrah! And there you have it, the entirety of Minecraft growing stuff. This was a lot longer of a video than I was expecting it to be, and my throat's starting to sore up. So thank you everyone for joining me in this grand adventure of Minecraft lessons. I hope you learned something interesting, and I hope you actually did learn something and probably enjoyed me finally remastering something that I did a terrible job at last time. And I will see you all in the next episode. Goodbye.